Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm here with Karen White. We're going to be doing a series of videos on how the planets show up in your chart to reflect your experiences with relationships. Karen and I did a course a couple years ago on the AtmaKaraka and the soul planet in relationships. And that's available as a 15-hour audio and video download course from Karen's website and also at actualvedicastrology.com through the downloadable courses page. So if as we're going through and you want to go a little more deeply into understanding yourself and your relationships through astrology and your planets, you can get that course. And what we do is we spend time focusing on each planet as your AtmaKaraka and how that shows up to indicate your tendencies within relationship, almost like your love languages in relationship. And you can also do that for your partner, the Dharkaraka, and so on. But anyway, today, Karen and I are going to be going through each planet and just comparing them to relationships and what you need to know. So I want to welcome you, Karen. Thank you for being here with me today.
Hi, Ryan. It's great to be working with you again.
Yeah.
Just to be doing videos again. It's fun. Yeah. And I did want to mention that my website is divinetimeastrology.com.
Good. Yes.
You know.
I forgot to mention that. So good.
Either one of us. It doesn't matter. You can get it from either one of us.
Yeah. Excellent.
Oh.
So, you know, you contacted me a little while ago with this idea, and I thought it was a pretty good idea because the planets, you know, you can take the sun, you can take the moon, and just by knowing what the moon represents, you can attribute that to how a person reacts in relationships. And so what I'm assuming, since we didn't really plan this out, this is all off the cuff conversation, I'm guessing what we can do is maybe start with the sun and consider the qualities of the sun and how we've seen the sun show up in charts and how that relates to a person's capacity in relationships. Is this kind of what you were thinking we should do when you contacted me earlier?
Yeah, and also we can talk about how each planet actually plays a role in relationships.
Right.
You know, Venus is the planet that rules relationships in particular, but it's not just Venus that determines the quality of your relationships or what you're like in relationships. And then there are certain planets that are more important depending on whether you're male or female.
Right.
Too. Right. And if you're gay, there's always one person who represents the feminine principle and one represents the male principle, because you have to have a polarity and for there to even be a relationship. So yeah, it's fascinating, really. I mean, I never would have thought that Saturn had anything to do with relationships, but he does. All of them do.
Right. And especially when we think about, for example, Saturn in the Navamsa, because I know we will be getting into particularly the Navamsa and maybe the Saptamsha as well, that, you know, Saturn can represent our capacity to endure the difficulties in a relationship, because, you know, all of us have this idea that relationship is always so easy and smooth sailing and nothing ever goes wrong. But, you know, if you got a good Saturn, that can show a great capacity to endure through and not allow a relationship to break up or be crushed just because of problems showing up, which are common to all of us, right?
Right. Especially things outside of our control.
Exactly.
You know, like death and the economy and things like that. And, you know, we've all seen television shows or movies where a couple experiences something awful, you know, like the death of a child or something like that, and then the relationship just falls completely to pieces.
Right.
You see other relationships where they're still together. You know, many years later, it's a shared sorrow, but it doesn't ruin their relationship.
Right. And one thing you mentioned a while ago, and I don't know if you've done this or not, but maybe it was during when we did some of those podcasts, you talked about doing relationship autopsies.
Yes.
Have you call them. Yeah. So have you maybe we can try to incorporate some of those principles,
sure,
you know, to help describe just how the planets are going to work.
Yes.
So let's just go ahead and start with the sun and the idea of the sun. So you've been, you know, at astrology for a while, and I know you've had a really deep interest in relationships, you know, doing the relationship autopsies and so on. So when it comes to the sun in relationships, what have you found to be its primary role Like when you see the sun in someone's chart based on the state that it's in or the situation that it's in, what kind of information does that give you about how they're going to approach relationships in regards to what the sun represents?
Well, I've noticed differences between men and women unless the sun is the AtmaKaraka. So when the sun is the soul planet, even women have a certain attitude towards relationships. Mm-hmm. And because the sun is more of a self-indicator planet, you know, it has to do with the things that are on your bucket list. You know, the things you feel like you must do in this lifetime to have a sense of accomplishment, like you're doing what you're supposed to do. And generally, the sun is more important in a man's chart because it represents our masculine side. And so men, obviously, that's their first suit. And it has to do with their purpose. It has to do with their ideals, their code, I call it, you know, how they conduct themselves and what they consider to be good behavior and bad behavior, etc. Right. And it's their ability to remain steadfast in a relationship, to not allow, like women, you know, we're more influenced by the moon. Mm-hmm. So that means our feelings change, and it's cyclic, right? But the sun is a straight.
You mean it's unpredictable?
It's unpredictable, at least from a man's point of view. Yeah. From women's point of view, we know what, you know, it's just really hard to explain to you. But
you mean it doesn't really make sense?
It makes sense to us. It doesn't make sense to you. At least that's what you claim.
Right.
Anyway, yeah, so no, the nature of the sun for relationship, I've experienced this with my husband. He has the sun in an angle. And it seems like, gosh, no matter how tumultuous our relationship may become sometimes, you know, my feelings are like, I fluctuate a lot. And because my AtmaKaraka is the moon too, so that really gets emphasized in me. And I can feel like when I'm upset, like the relationship is a big mistake. We should break up and we should just leave each other alone. And he's like, and I ask him, well, don't you feel that way? And he says, no, that never crosses my mind. Right. And it's amazing to me that he has that steadfastness. And as a woman, it's really, really nice. Mm-hmm. It feels wonderful to know that your man's feelings are not going to change just because you have an argument or because something happens. So there's that steadfastness. But anyway, as I was saying, even a woman, when her AtmaKaraka is the sun, she will tend to have a sense of purpose in life that is not beyond or ahead of. Sometimes she can put her career or her purpose ahead of her relationships. Right. And that's okay. I mean, you know, it takes all kinds. And there are some men where their Darakaraka, which is the person they're looking for, is the sun. So they like these qualities in their woman, and that's perfectly okay. Right. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have a role reversal or anything like that. Just likes those qualities about her. And anyway, so she too can have more of a steadfastness when it comes to relationships. She has a sense of she has values that she sticks to. Right.
It's like a code of ethics.
A code of ethics. Now, what can be difficult, however, is when a woman has the sun in the ascendant in the first house. Right. Because they can be really hard on their men.
Well, what about when you have like a tropical Aries sun? You know, wouldn't that be kind of hard on? Wouldn't that be kind of hard on because you've got that exalted sun? And I've just noticed sometimes that, you know, in relationships like that, like if you've got two people who are very driven, as a sun might be, and very steadfast, that sometimes that can give like some kind of clashing of egos at times, like as if they both want to be in control. Is that something you've seen, you know, in your work, or do you?
Oh, you mean being as an Aries sun woman, have I experienced this?
No.
Well, you know, what's really funny is my husband just started a new job, and so I'm doing things that I wasn't doing before, just to make sure that we don't waste time on non-essential things and we have time for us, right? And he seemed to be kind of lackadaisical about that. So I was saying, I'm doing this so that when you come home, you can just go right to bed and we'll have time. And he said to me, he said, sometimes you just have to let a man do the things he's got to do. I was like, really? So you're experiencing this as being like controlling or something like that? And anyway, so we had this big conversation. So now I tease him, about doing manly things in a manly kind of way, and how I'm not getting in his way. But yeah, so I think maybe sometimes I might do that. Sure.
Yeah. Well, and the reason, the real reason I was bringing that up was, because when you've got the sun in good dignity, like exaltation, well, that makes a pretty strong sun. With all these qualities like you're talking about, like consistency and steadfastness, and doing the right thing, making personal sacrifices, things of that nature. Well, it does depend on the dignity of the planet, right? Because
sure.
Yeah, you get the sun in good dignity. We may be in a fashion that's supportive, right? But if you get a planet like the sun in a little bit worse dignity, or even in neutral dignity, maybe the person has a harder time really staying as steadfast or committed as they ideally should be, right? So dignity does play a big role in that, right?
It does, yeah. And also accidental dignity or directional strength, depending on where it is. My daughter has the sun in the Ascendant. It's in Taurus. It's in an enemy sign, but nevertheless, she has qualities that definitely are sun-like. She has a lot of great qualities, but there are times when I've noticed that, when a woman has the sun in the Ascendant, it can put her masculine side much more prominent and obvious. And so she can have problems in relationships and not understand why.
Right.
Or she'll be attracting men who are more feminine energy. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But she'll want him to have other qualities that are not as developed as hers. And two, also when the sun is in the Ascendant for a woman, no matter what sign it's in, she has really high expectations for his behavior because the sun is noble. And so she'll want him to always act in a noble way and to be self-sacrificing and all the things that the sun is. And she can be a little hard on her men. She's not allowed to show any weakness or anything.
She doesn't happen to have a Saturn-Mars combination too, does she?
Of course she does. She was born during my first Saturn return.
Okay, because the things that you've described, like those are sun things, but they're also Saturn-Mars things, right? Because if you've got that Saturn-Mars combination yourself and you hold yourself to a high expectation, you're also going to do that for other people too. So,
that's true. And it like everything in astrology, it's good and bad, all depending on the context. It's all about context. So like I know because my sun is exalted and I have it with my AtmaKaraka, Venus, I tend to admire certain things in men, and I can see them more easily because I don't know, I guess I'm sensitized to it. And so, but yet I can also, like I have a high standard, it's true. And I'm not attracted to men. I've never been attracted to men who did things that I considered to be, dishonest or not very noble, or he doesn't have a code, or, any of those things. That was like a total turnoff to me. But if he has integrity, if he's, he holds himself to a high standard, then I admire that. I totally admire that. And of course, I want him to be more masculine than me. Right. And, and he is. He is. In those qualities of the sun, the ability to be steadfast. Once you set your mind to something, you do it, no matter what. I can't say I'm like that. It's true, I'm not, because I'm the moon. Right. So,
Well, and the story or the thing that you mentioned about I think it was was it your daughter? You were talking about holding people to high standards. Was that right?
Yeah.
And you also said that sometimes she can't. You put it a different way, but you said something like she can't see the other person in relationship, or it's almost like. Anyway, let me tell you what came to mind. You can tell me if you can relate it back. It's like the story of the son. Right? When the son got married, the son was so bright, so caught up in himself that he kind of drove, his wife away. And so he had to put himself, or he had the creator of the universe, or Daksha, put him on a lathe and take off some of that brightness, right? So, what I'm thinking of is that with the sun, if it's really prominent in a person's chart, specifically with relationships, the person might have difficulty seeing the other people around them, and they might be so fixated on their path and their direction, and that every now and then they might need to remember to kind of bring it in and know that they are in relationships with others and not just all by themselves, like the sun tends to think, because when he's in the sky, that's all you see.
Right.
You don't see other planets. It's just the sun.
This is true.
Right.
This is true, especially planets that are close to the sun, are called combust the sun. They can definitely be eclipsed. And whether you're a man or a woman, if you have the sun in the ascendant, then pretty much everything is all about you.
Yeah, well, that's true. And the other side of the coin is if the sun is in the descendant, the seventh house, right?
Right.
I found that sometimes that can indicate a person. Now, this is just generally speaking, it's not true for everybody, might have a more egotistical partner or a more self-absorbed partner.
Or a partner who has something that they're trying to do, like maybe they have their own business.
Right.
Or they're doing something in the world.
They're more absorbed in their path.
They're more absorbed in their path. Right.
Yeah.
Right. But if a person has the sun in the seventh, that's what they like. They like that.
Right. Yeah.
They like serving that person and helping them to do their purpose, whatever that is.
Well, that brings up a good point with relationships, namely that we have an ideal, the fairy tale we've been told about relationships, and that everyone likes something. And that something that you like isn't always the fairy tale.
True.
Some people like the spouse that they'll listen, they'll be sensitive, they'll do these sorts of things. Other people like the spouse that doesn't talk and just does their own thing. Some people might like to relate to someone sexually in a very intimate, kind, soft, gentle manner. Other people want you to get out the whips and the chains, right? So that's the other important point, is that as we talk about these things, we need to be clear that we're not trying to define an ideal beyond just revealing that everyone might have a different ideal.
Right. We're all very individual. There's the archetypes, the norm, like you said, the fairy tale, and then there's reality.
Right.
Like I get women who they have a really strong sun, they have a powerful career. That's what they've devoted most of their childbearing years to.
Right.
And then they come to an astrologer when they're about 35 or later, and they're like, okay, where is he?
Right.
And so, I tell them, well, you have a very strong masculine energy, and you're not going to be, giving up your career anytime soon. So really what you need is a man who's more feminine energy. And they're like, oh, yuck. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. It's great when that's what you need.
Right.
And there are a lot of men who are feminine energy, but these are men like doctors, healers, musicians. I mean, they're not necessarily where their feminine energy is more prominent than their masculine, but they certainly have access to it.
Right.
And they're using it. And, these are totally respectable men. There's nothing wrong with them whatsoever. You just have to change your idea of what it means when a man has his feminine side a little bit more developed than, say, the average man.
Right.
And that's great. And that's what you need. Because some women, if they have, again, if the moon is afflicted, or they have the ascendant, the moon, and the sun all in masculine signs, they're just not going to be able to be that receptive feminine person.
Right.
They would have to work so hard on that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well,
why fight it? Just go with it.
yeah, and you bring up a very valid point. That's one thing I have noticed a lot as well in sessions when, particularly women, when you said they, in the mid-30s or so, and they're asking, what about relationships? What about children? And you see in their chart, like you described, like a prominent sun or a prominent 10th house, like there's more focus on career
Right.
and one's own self-development, or even like Rahu in the 10th. I mean, that can be one where the woman has to put more attention.
Or the first house.
Or the first house on themselves
Right.
and activity and career in the world.
Right.
And what I've always found was that when I kind of talk about that, I will say things like, well, your life, your path is meant to be more of an active person in the world, not like a stay-at-home mom, not to be defined by relationships. And I try to stress that it doesn't mean you don't have relationships. It just means you need to realize the boundaries that are appropriate to the relationships.
Right.
And part of them will say, well, that's such a relief because I felt that way anyway.
Yeah. Yes, they always tell me that too.
Yeah. But then I say, well, who told you that it should be the other way? Like, well, my mom wants me to get married, and like, you're not getting any younger, and these sorts of things. So
right.
oftentimes we do have to realize that there's a cultural influence, right? And that's a hard thing to shake. But the beauty of the chart is that through these strengths, if we can accept it and we can work with it, we can use a good sun energy to direct our life, and realize that we, especially if you're a woman with a strong sun energy, you might have to be the strong one in the relationship,
In some ways.
In some ways, right? Not all the time, but in some ways.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing too, when you have, this is the thing I like to tell people, and that is, you can create any kind of marriage you want. We're not bound by, there's not something that, the problem is that when people get married, there are archetypes that get activated. A husband archetype, wife archetype. And there's so much stuff in that. But in reality, every relationship is very particular and unique and created by both people.
Right.
And the more conscious you are, the more of a unique and very mutually satisfying relationship you can create.
Mm-hmm.
So long as you're willing to throw away the fairy tale.
Right.
Because it's really about how you feel with someone. And if you're a woman who is in her head and her masculine side morning till night, well, then you're going to need somebody who's going to draw you into your heart.
Right.
And that's typically a role reversal. But who cares if it works, if you're happy, if you're both happy. But still, women, and I think what they're really asking is, how do I access my feminine side? I want to feel like the woman in the relationship. Because it's a very pleasurable feeling.
Well, I don't know that, but okay.
Well, men, they feel pleasure when they feel like a man.
Right.
When they're feeling respected and et cetera in the relationship. And that's a really great feeling. And I tell them, well, you can be a very masculine woman, but still be the feminine in relationship to the man that you're with. He can still be the masculine energy. But that means you have to consciously put your masculine side away pretty much when you leave work, when you get home, so you walk in the door. You put him aside, and you have to consciously do it from within.
Right, for sure. Yeah, definitely. The chart is the somewhat unconscious things, the habits that we've had from the past. So, oftentimes when we become aware of them, we do have to do what you say, which is consciously make a choice and choose something different. In the same way with the sun in a man's chart. Like if a man has the sun AtmaKaraka, or a strong sun in an angle, or by dignity, yes, it may be that the person's consistent, the person can get the job done, they're able to tap into their masculine side, but there's also drawbacks to that. Meaning that the sun is a dry planet, which means that if a man has a strong sun, or the masculine energy part of the relationship has a strong sun, they might be more prone to just not really talk that much or share that much. Someone might ask them a question, they just say no. And they don't go along and explain why. And oftentimes men with a prominent sun have to learn that when interacting with females or female energy, that they need to, again, put aside a little bit of that dryness of the sun. And so I'm interacting with a more lunar quality here. So even though I don't understand it, I'm going to try to express my thoughts with a little more just effort, right? Even if I don't know why.
Well, too, it makes me think of Dr. Pat Allen.
Okay.
Some of the things that she says. She says, women think they want their men to share their feelings with them. He never shares his feelings with me.
Right.
He says, no, you don't. Don't ask him what his feelings are.
Right.
Because if he tells you and you're hurt,
right,
then that's not fair. Just don't do that. He'll tell you if he wants to.
Right.
And he'll only do it if it's safe to do so.
That's exactly right. That's an important point, because a lot of people in relationships, like the men or the masculine part of the relationship, won't share what they're feeling, because every time they do, it gets turned around back on them. Like, okay, you want to know why I feel this way, and the man expresses, well, I'm angry because of this, and immediately it's taken as, oh, so now you're blaming me. And I'm like, no, you just want to know what I was feeling, and that's what I'm feeling. So there is always that fine line, and you got to learn that balance of both the moon and the sun. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the sun in the Navamsa before we go into the moon.
Let's do.
So when we think about the Navamsa, I know everyone attributes it to marriage, and that's good, but it's really the thing that we are devoted to, right? And it could be career, it could be our spiritual practice, it could be our mate. But the sun shows us, again, with what kind of consistency, with what kind of self-sacrifice, as you mentioned, what kind of steadfastness are we able to approach our devotion? So, someone with a strong sun in the Navamsa may make all kinds of sacrifices for their relationships when they're devoted to it. They may say things like, I'm not going to go out and play darts with my friends 3 nights a week. I want to sacrifice this extra time with my friends because I want to spend it with you, right? Yeah. And that's a silly sacrifice, but that's just
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
So, in your experience, when you look at the sun in the Navamsa and you're considering relationships, what are some things that you look at, or what are some things that usually stick out to you when you're kind of figuring out what that sun's doing in the Navamsa?
Well, if it's in good dignity, first of all, I look at the dignity, and then I look at where it is. You mean
so
house? I don't, because I don't automatically do rectification of every chart.
Right.
I tend to just focus on the dignity.
Okay.
And the aspects, simply because I don't always trust, the cusps and if they're in the right place and all that. But the dignity will tell you a lot. So like I told you, I really noticed this quality in my husband. And, this is the great thing about the study of astrology, is that you get to appreciate your mate on yet another level. You understand things about them in their chart. And he has the sun exalted in Aries in his Navamsa.
Okay.
So, I know that means longevity. It means longevity. So the better dignity of the sun, the more likely you are to have a longer term relationship. And if the weaker the sun is, or the more afflicted the sun is, then you're more likely to have relationships that are on and off, or they tend to end soon, in spite of all your best efforts.
Right. Well, what you bring up there, I know we'll get to this when we talk about Saturn too, but with the longevity, that's also, a Saturn quality, because Saturn guilt over longevity. Yeah. And as we talked about, when Saturn has trouble in the Navamsa, the person has a hard time enduring the small difficulties to make a good relationship. And that also contributes to longevity.
Yes.
And this makes sense too, because Saturn is the son of the sun. Whereas the sun is the life, the inspiration, how inspired are you towards it? And that's good for longevity. Well, Saturn is, when the crap comes along, how much can you stick with it?
Yeah.
Saturn is the death or the ending of things.
Right.
They're both kind of like opposite sides of the same coin. So anyway, that just popped in my mind. And with the sun and longevity, do you also find that the better the dignity of the sun in the Navamsa, that the person also might have greater capacity to be inspired to try to make things work?
Yes. They keep bouncing back. They bounce back. And when the sun is weak, there tends to be, and Saturn, because they do go together. You can't have one without the other.
Right.
So when there's difficulties that come up, if one person in the relationship has a weak sun whether they're man or woman, if they have a weak sun in the Navamsa, or they have a weak Saturn, then they tend to believe things like, well, it should be easy.
Right.
It should be easy all the time. And it's true that when you have really good compatibility with somebody, a lot of things are easier. But there are things that are going to happen in life that are absolutely inevitable.
Right.
And, we still have the ideal that a good relationship is one that has longevity. And it's not necessarily true. You can have a short relationship. It can be great. I mean, the person could die or something, But that isn't always the case. However, if you want longevity, if you want to actually build something together, because the Navamsa represents committed relationships, but there's usually some kind of legal thing.
Right.
We're not talking about
to an illegal relationship.
Illegal relationships, right? And that brings up another thing, is that some people, you look at the Navamsa and then the Sapsamsa, the seventh divisional chart, which represents long-term relationships outside of marriage. Some people do much better in those than they do in the married thing.
That's also, it doesn't have to be necessarily outside of marriage, as in the illegal way we were talking, but it could just be not just dating. It could just be
just having relationships that,
right. The person is really, that's when they write to you and they say, I have no problem like dating people, but I never seem to get married. Right.
Yeah.
That could be when the Saptamsha is stronger, but the Navamsa doesn't have enough solidification or power to kind of bring it together.
Right. To make it happen. That's true.
Right.
And Venus in the Navamsa is probably the one that is really mostly responsible for making that happen, because it's the most important planet in the Navamsa.
Right.
But nevertheless, I'm thinking that the people who say things like, well, we don't need a piece of paper, to show our devotion to each other, they probably have a strong Sapsamsa and a weak Navamsa. And for them, that's true.
Right. Yeah.
So,
well, the thing about the sun too, one final thing that comes to mind when we think about dignity, I think oftentimes one of the things that ruins relationships more than anything else is a poor self-image.
Yeah.
And so the sun does represent how we feel about ourselves. And it is ego, but it doesn't have to be ego like bad ego. It's just, we respect ourselves.
Yeah.
Do we feel that we are deserving of good relationships? Do we feel like we're deserving of making good choices in that regard? And so if the sun might have some affliction in the Navamsa, I'm curious if you've seen this too, but I've often seen people who make bad decisions, aside from what Venus is doing, but make bad decisions because they themselves just don't feel worthy of a good relationship.
This is true. And especially this shows up in a woman's chart where she's not able to receive the good things that a man wants to give her. Well, life wants to give her even. And so she'll have ways of deflecting it and, being unreceptive to it so that the man feels like, wow, she doesn't need anything she doesn't want anything from me.
And one of the things, in a man's chart that's possible, or the masculine energy in a relationship, that could be a situation where there's poor self-image and they end up making choices to sabotage the relationship, where it doesn't matter what they do. I mean, it could be gambling or not being honest about a certain situation because they don't feel that they themselves are worthy of in a sense, being truthful enough to maintain the relationship. So it's always fascinating how the sun, dealing with truth and intelligence and steadfastness and commitment.
Honorableness.
What's that?
Honorableness.
Yeah, honorableness. Yeah. and so, when you look at, and that's another important point there, is that we do need to be aware that when we look at people's charts, the whole honorableness thing, some people don't care about that. Meaning, like, we can have this idea, like a lot of people do, that relationships should go this way. I get the ring, we're together forever, and there's never any issues. Well, there are also relationships that are open relationships. Now, I'm not necessarily saying I go out and advise those, but other people, there are books written on them. There's the whole culture all about that.
Yeah, they're called polyamorous, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a big headache myself. If you think about it, one person is enough.
Yeah, no kidding.
But that's something that may actually show up within the person's chart, and we can interpret it as, you will be not honorable in relationships. But if there was someone else who's not honorable in relationships, well, maybe that equates to, you have some kind of arrangement that works out for you. Now, again, we can make all our judgments we want, but what I'm trying to get at is that, like you said earlier, when we look at these relationships, we need to be very clear on the fact that as long as the people are coming at it with awareness, and they're attending to it, understanding themselves and where they're coming from, that we can't necessarily lock people into an ideal. Yeah. Right? Because then we just cause all kinds of problems.
It does. I mean, that does cause more problems than in just about anything. When you have set ideas in your mind about how a relationship's supposed to go.
Right.
I mean, a great example of this is Valentine's Day. Right? We've got all these expectations.
I can tell you secretly hate Valentine's Day, right?
I think most men do, actually. And that is because of all those expectations.
Right.
And the media doesn't help with this at all. And then there's the compete and compare game, right? Oh, well, your guy did this for you, and I just got this for mine. Well, that must mean something. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. You got to not do that, not compete and compare, and have some ideal that you're measuring your poor husband against.
Right.
Who's always doing, and that's another thing too that brings up to the difference between like romantic love and guy love. Okay. And it wasn't until I really started studying, I guess, the differences between men and women, and what masculine energy is and what feminine energy is, that I came to appreciate what I call guy love. Now, I don't think this does not give men permission to buy their woman jumper cables for Valentine's Day. This is not okay.
Okay.
But nevertheless, because then I don't need to explain that.
Yeah.
But throughout the rest of the time, like when he does things like put gas in your car and top off the oil and take out the trash and all this practical stuff, that's love. And if you don't realize that, then you don't get to receive it. You don't get to feel it. You don't get to appreciate it. And it's not just when he gives you flowers and writes you a love poem that it means he loves you, because there are guys who, they understand that women are suckers for this stuff, and they use it, and they use it just basically to get laid.
Yeah.
And they have no intentions whatsoever of taking the relationship any further than that. And then the women, not understanding this about men, they think he's in love too.
Right.
It's not. It's when he does guy love for you, he loves you. He's using his son. He's using his son. He's being responsible to the relationship, and he's taken care of. It's really interesting. Like, women don't tend to understand this, especially when they're young. No, that's not true. There are some women, like women who have a lot of earth energy in their chart. That's very important to them. That they do understand that. They appreciate that. And there are some women who don't even like the flowers and the hearts and all that stuff because they are suspicious of it.
Right.
Like, maybe they should be. I don't know. Yeah. because it just depends on your temperament.
Right.
But anyway, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah. Well, the important point you brought up about comparing like the Valentine's Day and comparing yourselves.
Yeah.
That's also a sun potentially in bad dignity. Because if you think about it, the sun, when it's strong, especially in regards to relationships, it follows its inspiration and it knows what it's about in the relationship. And that's why oftentimes we do have the sun debilitated in Libra and not doing so well in Taurus, which is signs ruled over by Venus, because when the sun is being essentially starved by Venus, it's comparing itself to others, right? It's saying, okay, so-and-so is saying this, my other advisors are telling me this, so therefore I can't be happy.
Yeah.
And so a good sun in the Navamsa, in good dignity, in maybe a trine or well placed in an angle, those kinds of suns, they don't need validation. Someone tell them you've got a good man, or you've got a good woman, or you've got a good relationship, or you should do this to make it better. They know, they have a distinct sense of that. And so my thought is to be cautious when your sun is maybe in bad dignity, or maybe in the 6th, 8th, or 12th house, to just be cautious of comparing yourself to other people, because that's a sure, toilet flush away from ending your relationship or causing, trouble within the relationship.
Yeah, no kidding. How to make your guy feel totally unappreciated.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Right.
So,
but
anyway.
There are ways that you can let him know, like, I just really love it when you give me this, or when you gave me that, I felt blah, blah, blah. Like, that's the best way to do it, rather than you
nagging.
Anything.
No nagging.
You must not love me. You know what I mean? That whole thing.
Right. Yeah, those are just mind games. Those are other problems in the chart.
Right. So now, you want to finish up the sun part about, there's so much more to say about it. There really is, but.
Well, ultimately, they can definitely check out the AtmaKaraka downloadable class, and I'll put a link to that at the bottom of this video, because we spent 2 hours talking about the sun.
Yes.
What it means to have that as your AtmaKaraka or Darakaraka.
Reading, also remedies and reading suggestions, and etc.
Yeah, so there's a lot to go into, but I think they can, unless you've got something else to say, I think there's
always more to say. There's tons more to say. When you're talking, I was like, all this stuff is going on in my mind, but we're not teaching a class right now, so
yeah, we're just
talking.
We're just talking. You have some product placement there?
Product placement?
Yeah, was that product placement that you just were doing?
No, I'm just getting dry mouth from talking so much.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and we'll just conclude here on the sun, and we'll go ahead and pick up with the moon. Does that sound good?
That sounds good.
Okay, great.